Uh, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for braving the rain and running over or driving over. Um, all right, so today I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Ty Laughlin. Ty is from Pennsylvania and graduated from Washington and Jefferson College in 2025 with a BA in environmental science. As an undergraduate, he had a wide variety of experiences, including working at the Washington and Jefferson Arboretum, researching the impacts of ecotourism on biodiversity at the Gondwana Conservation Foundation in South Africa, and researching fire recovery rates at Ohio State University. Ty joined us in September of 2025 and has been an absolute pleasure to have in the plant ecology program. Easy to get along with, really good at field work, and is generous in sharing his knowledge about Gen Z culture with some of his older folks. On top of all that, he's been organizing family dinner the past few months, including the dinner tomorrow night, so don't forget. So every few years, we get a plant ecology intern who's drawn to the seasonal ponds of the station, and this year that intern was Ty. His project focuses on the effects of fire in seasonal ponds, which is a topic we know less about than we might think. On the one hand, we know quite a bit about the importance of fire for the surrounding upland scrub habitats, and fire is thought to be important for reducing woody encroachment into the ponds. On the other hand, half of the year, these ponds are filled with fire's arch nemesis, water. So just because ground doesn't necessarily mean that a pond is going to burn. As you'll see, Ty's project makes an important contribution to our knowledge about fire and seasonal ponds. So Ty actually finished his internship about a month ago, and he's been a seasonal research assistant with us for about a month. And then we're lucky to have him for one last month in June before he heads to North Carolina to start a PhD program at Wake Forest University. Turn it over to Ty.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ty Laughlin. I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my work as a plant ecology intern here with you guys today. Specifically, I'm going to be talking to you about fire's role in preserving seasonal pond vegetation here in the scrub. So, as we know, wetlands are super important ecosystems around the world. They do all sorts of functions for us. They are highly productive ecosystems, making them important carbon sinks in the face of climate change. They harbor immense amounts of biodiversity, protecting all sorts of unique species here. And they're also very important for storing water during extreme weather events such as floods or storms. They also do a good job of slowly releasing that water after filtering it out back into other systems. And although we know how important they are as ecologists and environmentalists, there's a lot of people out there that don't see it the same way. So unfortunately, many of these wetlands around the world are imperiled by human activity. For example, in the United States, the Fish and Wildlife Service has reported approximately a 50% decrease in wetland cover since the 1780s. And Florida is not much different, seeing around a 44% decrease in wetland cover since receiving statehood. All right, so looking at seasonal ponds, within the scrub, these are how wetlands take form out here in the scrub along the Lake Bowes Ridge. So these ponds are seasonal depressional ponds, meaning they form within slightly lower elevation areas throughout the scrub. They're seasonal in nature. They fill up with water during the wet season and dry out during the dry season, generally with a hydro period less than 1 year. These incredibly dynamic, varying habitats. They range from a few square meters to several acres. They can be pretty flat and shallow or super deep. And they also harbor a wide range of different plants and animals. But generally speaking, they're dominated by graminoids and forbs. They don't have a lot of structural complexity. It's generally, one layer of grasses or forbs. And these plants are generally used to receiving full direct sunlight. And these seasonal ponds are very important sources of biodiversity throughout the scrub here. Many of the different plants and animals we see are very reliant upon these water sources. All the oak toads we see, other amphibians, some dragonflies and other insects rely upon these seasonal ponds as breeding grounds. It's also important for bringing in different wading birds. And of course, for the sake of my project, harboring all sorts of different water-tolerant plant species. And as you might have expected, with these seasonal ponds being scattered throughout the scrub, they are very fire reliant to maintain the sensitive habitats within them. And just like the rest of the scrub, fire plays an important role in reproduction of different plants, recycling nutrients, clearing out detritus, and can even eliminate some invasive species. But the thing with fire here in the seasonal ponds, timing is very important. So seasonality plays an important role. Generally, it's recommended to burn these seasonal ponds in the transition period between the dry season into the wet season. But in uncharacteristically dry conditions like we're experiencing this year, the Forest Service puts out burn bans, and we aren't able to burn when we would like to. By the time we are able to burn again, it tends to be a little bit later in the wet season, and some of these ponds start filling up and they don't burn as we would like them to. And additionally, these seasonal ponds generally have conflicting fire intervals with the surrounding scrub. So they should be burned roughly every 6 to 9 years, whereas much of the rest of the scrub should be burned 10 to 19 years. And with these ponds being scattered throughout the rest of the scrub, creates a logistical nightmare for burn crews and land management teams, making it very difficult to ensure that these ponds actually have that fire interval. So, but what happens if we aren't using fire properly within these ponds? So as I mentioned earlier, these ponds are important habitat for all sorts of plants and animals, but I want to highlight some important endemic and endangered plant species. The Lake Bowes Ridge is known for all sorts of rare and endemic plants, and two of the most notable examples here on the station are Colitania abscissa cutthroat grass and Hypericum edisonianum Edison St. John wort. So without proper fire management, we are at risk of losing some of these species. And additionally, these ponds can also be vulnerable to woody encroachment without proper fire management. So different scrub trees and shrubs, some of the slash pines or oaks can start to creep in. And with these trees bring shade, and a lot of the graminoids and forbs aren't very fond of that shade. There's also something else a little bit worse called a bayhead invasion. So there's all sorts of bays native to the state of Florida, but generally they can quickly colonize, shade out other species, and rapidly release organic matter into the soil, altering the hydrology and changing the hydro period, and ultimately prevent fire from coming back into these systems, returning them ever to their original state. So with all these different concerns and considerations in mind, I came to the question, how does fire suppression impact seasonal pond vegetation? It's obviously a pretty general question, so I wanted to break that down a little bit further. So I wanted to look first at to what extent are seasonal ponds fire suppressed. So I wanted to actually quantify that and better understand just how bad of an issue this actually is. And then from there, I wanted to better understand how the plants are actually impacted. How does fire impact seasonal ponds in regard to community cover, tree establishment, and vegetation structure? So to get this started, I first had to pick out the ponds to actually look at. So I picked out 48 seasonal ponds throughout Archbold. I focused just on the main station, scrubbing the main station. I'm not looking at the reserve or ranch or any other associated properties. So I worked really closely with Ali Mula in the beginning stages to look at the most recent burn across each burn unit. And we were looking for ponds that did not burn, but the surrounding scrub area around them did burn. And we called these fire suppressed ponds. So we were able to locate 24 ponds that did not burn in their most recent fire exposure. And then we paired these ponds up with ponds that did burn. So we paired them up according to burn unit. So they received the same fire on the same day, but responded differently. We also tried to pair them up according to size and proximity. And we did this pairing structure for two main reasons. So one, just helps to naturally inject some variation in fire history into my sample here, but it also helps to control for a couple confounding variables. Keeping them close in proximity helps to control for some soil differences, whether it's yellow sand versus white sand. Helps to control for dispersal distances of different plants. Not all the plants can disperse very far, so I want to ensure these plants actually have the opportunity to be in a given pond I'm comparing them to. And yeah, so as I went along with these ponds, I collected data in three main broad ways. So I looked at historical records, mainly in the form of fire history data. I did some field surveys, and I also collected some drone imagery. So looking first at each individual pond, I wanted to look at a number of different site-specific characteristics to be used later on in some modeling. So I worked closely with Ali again to gather the fire history for these 48 ponds across the entire burn history, dating back to, I believe, 1967. So I'm not going to go through all 7 of them, but we gathered 7 different fire history variables, burn count, fire severity, things like that. And we also collected pond area and soil moisture in the form of volumetric water content during the dry season to get a sort of measure of how well these ponds retain water in the dry season. So that brings me to my first sub-question. To what extent do prescribed burns successfully burn ponds? The answer is unfortunately not very well. Seasonal ponds substantially burn in only 28% of burns. So the majority of time when we go out there and burn, we're left with an image you see up here on the screen. You see a lot of the surrounding scrub successfully burns, but the fire does not do a good job of actually getting into the pond itself. And I wanted to go a little bit further. So looking at average fire return intervals now, we found that 85% of sampled ponds are beyond their recommended burn interval. So like I said earlier, should be burned on average every 6 to 9 years. But a lot of these ponds are being burned on average at an interval greater than 9 years. So this means, we are in fact seeing burnt fire suppression in our ponds across the station. And that does kind of set the groundwork for my remaining questions. But I do want to take a quick second to kind of clarify these results. I don't want this to reflect poorly on the burn crew here. There are two main reasons we're seeing these results.
That's okay.
First, of course, the burn bans that I mentioned earlier makes it difficult to effectively burn the ponds when it's ideal to. And also, Archbold just by design has set up to have different fire return intervals in each burn unit. So some ponds are intentionally kept within burn units that have longer fire return intervals. Okay, so moving into my next sub question, how does fire impact community cover of seasonal pond plants? So I looked at this question primarily through the use of some field surveys, specifically a series of community cover transects in each of my 48 ponds. So I went out there, set out the reel tape, and got estimates of total cover of each of 10 different plant categories I was looking at. So I have a number for each pond, and then I went and created some generalized linear mixed effect models using those site-specific characteristics I mentioned earlier as my predictors: fire history, pond area, soil moisture. And then my response variable for each model was each individual vegetation type. So I have 10 models total. Then I went through the model fitting process to find the theoretical best model for predicting cover percentages. And yeah, so I want to look a little bit deeper, or real quick, I want to clarify, although I looked at 10 different vegetation types, for the sake of time in this presentation, I'm just going to focus on 4 of those 10. Some of the ones I think are a little bit more relevant to conservation. So I'm focusing on some endangered and endemics in the form of Colitania abscissa, cutthroat grass, and Ibericum edisonianum, Edison's St. John's wort. Then also in terms of woody encroachment, so I'm looking at the bays and scrub trees and shrubs. Just for reference, the most frequently seen bay was loblolly bay, Cordonia lasianthus, and the most commonly seen scrub tree or shrub within these seasonal ponds was Pinus ellioti slash pine. So before I look at some individual models, I wanted to just look across all my models, seeing which predictors were retained in through the fitting process to try to see what's most important in predicting the cover percentages of different plants. So we can see the most frequently included predictor variables were soil moisture, last majority fire severity, and burn success rate, whereas the least included variable was average majority fire severity. So that implies across the whole fire history, fire severity doesn't seem that important in predicting plant cover percentages. Then I also want to highlight, I made 10 models, but none of these predictors were involved in any more than half of those. So only 5 out of 10 at the highest, which kind of implies that there's all sorts of different variables all working together. There's not any one fire history variable we can just check off a box and say every pond burned at this severity, so we're good. There's all sorts of different variables all working together to create the community composition of our ponds. So starting to look at some individual models, we'll start off with the endangered and endemics. And I found that endangered species generally benefit from fire. So just to walk you through how to interpret these graphs, just in case, we have estimated change in cover percentage on the x-axis, the variables retained in fitted models, and then you see it to the right of the dotted line, it's an increase in percent cover. To the left, it's a decrease. So for Ibericum edisonianum, you see a pond area. With pond area increasing, we see increases in percent cover of Hypericum edisonianum. Opposite with soil moisture, decreases in Hypericum as we see more wetter soils. And then for the fire variable burn count, the more often these ponds are burned throughout the fire history, we see higher levels of Hyperica metasonianum. And then similarly for Colitania abscissa, with cutthroat grass, decreases in larger ponds, but in the most recent fire, having a higher burn severity was associated with increases in cutthroat grass, and we also saw increases if the pond successfully burned in its most recent fire exposure. So all in all, it seems like these endangered plants do in fact benefit from fire. It's a less clear picture when it comes to the woody species. With the scrub trees and shrubs, we see decreases in percent cover with longer time since fire and longer average fire intervals. And with the bays, we see decreases in bay percentage with higher burn counts and higher burn severity in the most recent fire. Some increases as a result of soil moisture, because these plants are water-loving plants, and then an increase as a result of burn success rate. All right, so moving into the next sub-question, how does fire impact tree establishment in seasonal ponds? So I approached this question primarily with some LiDAR imagery. So me and Susmita from GIS and data management, we went out many afternoons, collected some imagery. I'll be real quick with this, but just in case people aren't as familiar with LiDAR, it stands for light, distance, and ranging. It's a tool that can be used, set a sensor up on a drone and scan an area. It can kind of create a 3D model of the area you're scanning called a point cloud. So using these point clouds, we can start to do some analyses. So I'm just going to walk you through some of my workflow here. So we did our scans across a big area involving multiple ponds. First, we just have to clip out each individual pond to focus in. Then we had to clear out some noise. Noise could arise for any number of things. You know, it could be a bird flying by, whatever, just creating some noise in the data we got to clear up to ensure the accuracy of some calculations. Once we have the clean data, then I was able to classify the ground versus the vegetation within this point cloud. So after doing that, I was able to create canopy height models for each pond. And these models essentially store the height data for all the plants within a cell. So I did my cells at a 1 meter squared resolution. And then these canopy height models were then used for another number of associated calculations. So the one I'm going to focus on here is classifying treetops. I was able to count up the number of trees in each seasonal pond to create some more models. So I went through the same process with fitting them and everything. And I found that tree count increases with increasing pond area, decreases when the most recent fire burned at a high fire severity, and we saw that it increased with higher soil moisture. With higher burn severity, we're seeing less trees, so fire could be used to exclude some trees here. And finally, we're moving into the last sub-question, how does fire impact structural complexity in seasonal ponds? So I used that same canopy height model I was just talking about, but instead of counting treetops, I began classifying crowns, and then separated out the areas with different structural complexities. So looking at areas that are just the graminoids and forbs versus the areas that have trees and some stuff growing under them. So I focused on these canopy covered areas and looking at their total area, created another generalized linear mixed effects model. The results here are not as clear. With ponds burned in the most recent fire, there's not a clear distinction between an increase or decrease, leaning a little bit more towards an increase, but nothing clear enough to be confident on. But we did see increases in canopy cover as a result of soil moisture. So I know I just threw a whole bunch of information at you guys. I was talking for a little while. So I want to reiterate a few key points that I went over in this project. So archbold seasonal ponds are largely fire suppressed. We do need to do a better job of making sure they burn. I also found that fire can be used as a tool to preserve endangered species here and also exclude bays to protect habitat. But I didn't find any direct evidence that fire changes structural complexity of these ponds. If you don't remember anything else, I want you to just remember this. Seasonal ponds are dynamic and distinct portions of the scrub, should not be overlooked while burning. Before I open up to questions, I want to say thank you to a couple people. Of course, I'm going to start off with my mentor, Dr. Aaron David. He was super helpful throughout this whole project, always willing to meet me. I'd hop in his office and throw some ideas at him and give me some advice. And of course, I got to say thank you to the rest of the plant lab for all the help throughout this whole project, helping me identify plants and teaching me how to use the soil moisture probe and everything. I owe a big thank you to Kevin Main for helping to inspire this project. I met with him when I started my internship. We went over some fire records and GIS, and he showed me some holes and burns, and those almost always corresponded to a seasonal pond. It's kind of what got me interested in this topic. I owe a big thank you to Ali Mula. Him and I spent many hours together in Teams calls or in his office going over code and pulling fire history data for this project. Of course, thank you to Smita for spending all those afternoons out with me collecting the LiDAR imagery. Thank you, Dustin, for field photography, and Maxwell Hanrahan Foundation for funding this project. And thank you to everyone else who helped me out with this project, Will and Laura, for setting this up today. And with that, I'll open up to questions.
Questions for Ty?
Yes. That was a great talk. How did you delineate the wetland?
I just used the shapefiles we had available from like GIS and data management. I think they did remote sense. I don't know the exact process they did it, but it was via remote sensing. They delineated out where the actual seasonal ponds are. It's pretty clear to see on a map. There's a clear distinction between the vegetation types.
Well, originally they were mapped by Abrahams and just using vegetation types.
Okay.
They'd be circle around, cut through it, circle around the main.
Okay.
And then that, since that was really early, there were a lot of errors with it, spatial errors.
Right.
And so that has been fixed over time, but it's never all been put back together really. But yeah, that's how it was originally mapped.
Yeah. I just have one more question. So in your in the plots that you showed, is there any significance of your standard errors overlapping with zero or not?
No, this was just based on the model's predictive accuracy, not on significance levels. No.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
So the big question that you can't answer, I guess. We have a responsibility to take care of our wildlife here, lands and waters, and especially maybe so the listed species. But yeah, it doesn't seem like things are going to change with forestry and keeping burn bans from happening. What's the solution? And anything that you've been thinking about this for months now,
Mhm.
but has anything popped into your head that might be a potential solution?
I think a big thing that we could do, it's really difficult logistically, as I mentioned, to go to each individual pond and make sure it's burning properly. But we can help to maintain this habitat by perhaps manual removal of woodies, especially the bayhead species, because those are real big threat once they get established. It's caused some serious issues in the ponds. So I know fire is a much more difficult thing. Of course, it'd be ideal if we can make sure we're burning them as often as recommended, but for preserving the habitat in other ways could be really helpful. Like I mentioned with the removal of woodies.
And one of the things I've been thinking about is how we burn is based on roads, basically.
Mhm.
Our burn units are not based on habitat type per se. They're based on roads, and then we assigned, fire return intervals kind of based on vegetation type. If we burned in a different fashion so that we put more fire on the landscape more frequently, I wonder if that would address some of this, if it would get to the ponds a little bit more frequently, even in spite of having burn bans time to time.
Yeah.
So I don't have an answer for how we do that necessarily, but it's something I've been thinking.
Yeah. Yes.
Is there literature on other sites or even like the ranch on how seasonal ponds there burn compared to?
There's not a lot on this, seasonal ponds, like the more scrub-like ponds. There is all sorts of literature out there on other wetland systems, but I couldn't find anything specifically on the ranch.
Yeah.
I know they do burn over there too, yeah, but it's a little different with
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's other sites that have gotten around this issue, or if this is like a wider spread, not article specific. Cool, thank you.
Yes.
Curious if you found in the fire history, is there are there records of fires that did happen in wetlands that weren't intended to be included in the burn?
Like you mean we set,
Yeah, like we,
to like a burn unit, but
yeah, intending to exclude fire from it, but it actually burned.
I don't think, no, I didn't notice that. I don't think that would be a situation that would rise, since the pond should generally be burned more often than the surrounding scrub.
Yeah. I was also curious, one of the photos, I was curious how many, like how many in your sample were actually bounded by a fire break? Did you have any?
There were a few. Yeah, that was, issue me and Ollie had to work out, with the fire history data, like making sure the perimeters, to actually delineate them as fire suppressed.
Yeah.
The perimeter burned. There are a couple, but I believe it's only 3 or 4. It's not many. Most of them are like out in the interior surrounded by, scrub.
And I can ask one more. I think one of your results showed that over longer fire return intervals, you see a decrease in scrub woodies. Is that right? How do you explain that? Is that just kind of with longer burn intervals that the herbaceous plants are kind of flourishing and out competing the woodies?
Yeah, so I was grappling over that. I think to be completely honest, it's just a matter of sample size. Luckily, not many of these scrub trees and shrubs were actually in these ponds. So the data based on that is only based on a handful of ponds, whereas like the cut through grass or Empiricum were in all the ponds.
So it's really the wetland, it's really the bays that are
the bays are the main threat. The water mainly keeps a lot of the other species out. And when they are in there, it's only like 1 or 2.
And is Loblolly Bay kind of the most aggressive of the bay?
I don't actually know. I would assume so, just based on what I've seen here on station, because the Loblolly Bay, all the bay heads are dominated by that, at least that I've seen. I did see some Magnolia, and I did see some of I believe it was Red Bay, but only like handfuls of those.
Yeah, 20 years ago, you would have seen a lot of red bay too.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if this is an argument to burn earlier in the season for some of these, or focus more burning before the ponds fill up. That may be a thing that we have seen from this, of like one way around this.
Yeah, if possible, I definitely think that could benefit the ponds. I think the difficulty there is again with the burn bans, but yeah, if we are able to burn earlier, that seems like it could be a good idea. The later we burn, the wetter they get and the less likely they are to successfully burn.
We've been pretty dry this year. When you were doing your surveys, how much of these ponds were wet throughout and how many dried out?
Yeah, I don't have an exact number, but I did the surveys mostly in November and December. So it was far enough back that they didn't, not all of them were completely dry. So many of the ones that had like maiden cane grass and other stuff were still filled with at least a little bit of water, but it never really went above my knees in any of the ponds. Some of the ponds did take a little while to drain out.
Any last questions? All right, well, let's thank Ty.